I'm Shannon Moore, and this is Formation. You know, for about 4 years or so here at University Christian Church, we had some form of a video series or a podcast called Formation. It went through several different reformations, if you will, and finally ended up in the last iteration as me sitting down with people from our church and from our community to talk about faith. I really enjoyed doing those interviews, and I learned a lot about a lot of you. However, all good things must come to an end, and Formation ran its course. However, we do have one final bonus episode that we are thrilled to be able to show to you this week. Back in the fall of 2024, we were in the midst of our Love Your Neighbor campaign, and I sat down with Reverend Dr. Stephen Cady. He is the president at Brite Divinity School at Texas Christian University, and we talked about what it means to love our neighbors. Well, he is coming to UCC on September 14th to preach for us, and I thought this would be a great opportunity for you to get to know him a little bit better. So sit back, enjoy this final episode of Formation. It's been a blast. Welcome to Formation, a weekly podcast from University Christian Church in Fort Worth, Texas. Every week I sit down with someone from our church or from the community and we talk about faith. And I'm very excited today to have on the podcast Reverend Dr. Stephen Cady. You are the president of Brite Divinity School. And how long have you been in Fort Worth now?
I got here in March, and then my family arrived in August, so it's been a few months.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you were saying before we started recording that you're actually enjoying this warmer weather at this time of year.
Absolutely. I mean, besides having to wear a suit when I go in, I would say I have not had jeans on since I've been here, which is pretty amazing and remarkable place to be. I haven't worn a coat yet, so I'm just trying to wrap my head around what that means.
Well, you already lived through a summer, so
yes,
the winter I think you'll like it. It's good.
Yes.
Well, Stephen, one of the things that I love to ask people about is how their faith was formed. What was the childhood, the faith of your childhood, or if there was one. Tell us a little bit about where you're from and what your religious background was.
Sure. So I grew up in Olathe, Kansas, which is a suburb of Kansas City on the Kansas side. And my parents took me to the little United Methodist Church down the street from our home from the time I was as far back as I can remember. So I was baptized into the Methodist Church, and I'm a Methodist ordained minister, so I've been in the Methodist Church my whole life. What was different about growing up in Olathe, Kansas, though, was being a United Methodist was a strange thing. So typically, people in my area of Kansas were either Nazarene, or LDS, so Mormon, or Catholic, and those were the three. And I was
expecting you to say Baptist.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I was United Methodist, and how that came out was, I grew up always being able to ask questions of faith, always being able to think about the construction and the structure of Scripture. And in other words, I never grew up thinking there was an actual person named Noah who built a boat and fit 2 of every animal and 7 of the clean, or whatever it was, right? That wasn't a part of my growing up. It was always a reminder that this doesn't have to have happened for it to be true. And the stories that were told came out for me and allowed the church to always, from the time I was little, be a safe space where I could run around and get into trouble and ask hard questions, which is still what I do today, and what I've done in my ministerial career. So it's always been an important part of my life.
Do you think that was that the church leadership that allowed that, or was it your parents, or combination of?
I would say mostly church leadership, though my parents were not against that. So my dad was a nurse, and my mom was a registrar in a middle school. In other words, they were not clergy. I didn't come from a clergy family. It's not as though they were they just went to church because they went to church, and they sang in the choir, and because they sang in the choir, they sang at both services. So I went to both services, and I sat through the first one and then ran around for the other one, messing. Our church was under construction for a moment, and so I would get into trouble literally in the basement with my friends, throwing rocks in the construction site. I'm sure we weren't supposed to be there. It was probably
I can
dangerous.
promise you weren't.
Yes, yeah. But it was very fun, and things that we weren't supposed to be messing around with, we did. And yet the church was that place for me. And there were a couple of experiences throughout my childhood that ended up solidifying the role of the church in my life. One of them was when I was about 13 or 14, my church hosted an AIDS conference. And it was a big deal. And this was the early 90s, and this was when people didn't understand AIDS yet. And this was all the conversation, if you remember back, about toilet seats and mosquitoes,
Yeah.
all sorts of things that people were frightened of. And so our church hosted this conference in which it invited all of the churches in the area to come and have some conversation. And they were Methodist churches that were invited, and they came, and the new bishop of the Methodist Church was sitting talking with a group of us youth. And as he was telling us about the ways that the United Methodist Church was responding to the AIDS crisis, somebody came in and whispered something in his ear and then left. And the bishop, who was brand new at the time, looked at us and he said, "Well, I've just been informed that when you leave here today, there are going to be protesters outside." And this was back when Westboro Baptist Church, and I'll use church pretty loosely here,
Right.
was just getting started. They were out of Topeka, Kansas, which is not far from Olathe, 45 minutes or so. They were on their way. And the bishop looked at us and he said, "I had 2 gay sons, and both of them died of AIDS." And then he said, "And as one of my sons was being buried, that man in his church was shouting at the funeral, 'Your son is burning in hell.'" And then he looked at us, and I remember 13 or 14-year-old me sitting in the room. He looked at us and he said, "I want you to know there's a different way to be a Christian." And I remember thinking, I want to be a different kind of Christian. And it was a really formative moment for me, and this important experience that was just there and powerful and reminded me of what the church could be, which is why I will frequently say, because it has the benefit of being true, that everything lastingly good in my life has come one way or another from the church. And I mean everything: my sense of identity, my sense of call, my sense of humor, my sense of justice, my sense of inclusion, my sense of self. It has all come one way or another from the church. And I'm forever grateful for that experience. So my faith formed me in a quite literal sense. I mean, formed me into who I am and made me who I am.
That is such a powerful story. I mean, I can feel it across time and across,
Yeah.
just through the power of that story. I can feel how powerful that was. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. What happened after high school, college? Where'd you kind of go from your hometown?
So my parents hadn't gone to college, so I didn't really have a sense of what to do in that moment. And so again, everything lastingly good came from the church one way or another. I went to my school counseling office, and this was back when they had a CD-ROM that you put into the computer, which had a list of all the colleges on it, and pre-internet days. And I sat in the office and I typed into the computer Methodist and theater, because I wanted to study theater. And Ohio Wesleyan popped up, which was 12 hours away. I had zero relationship to it. And I called them, and they sent me information, and it's the only place I applied, and I went because of Methodist and theater.
And so you were a theater major?
I was a theater major in college.
Okay.
And now early, in high school, I became more and more involved in my church, and especially at the, denominational level, and going on trips. And our family didn't have very much money growing up. And so my church was the way that, they not only helped us when we were in need as a family, but they also helped to send me on these trips that I wouldn't have gone on. And we went on this from Topeka, Kansas, we went on this tour that was called the UNDC tour, which was to go to New York and then Washington, D.C., and we talked about human rights violations and met with people. And these were really formative moments for me, and I came out of those with some of the adults in those moments, which I think is sometimes what it takes, saying, hey, have you thought about ministry? Have you thought about that? And of course I said, no way, and no, that's not what I want. But I did come out with a sense that whatever I did with my life would be a ministry of sorts. But I thought it was going to be in theater. And so I went to Ohio Wesleyan. I met Emily, my wife there. We met our first day, our freshman year. Again, everything
Really?
good in my life came from the church. And she's a lifelong Methodist as well. And so we met. And then we graduated, and I had a job at a theater company in Florida, and she had a job at a theater company in Columbus, Ohio, and I really wanted it to work with her, so I moved to Columbus, Ohio, and we got engaged, and we got married, and we were looking for a church home. This is, getting into the call to ministry. I don't know if you want that yet or not, but we were looking for a church home, and we couldn't find one. We were looking for some place that was welcoming and inclusive and where we felt connected, and we were just really struggling. And then we were working on starting this theater company, and we had 501c3 status, so we were an official nonprofit. We were working on our first show. We were very cool. We were gonna do this show in this abandoned bank in downtown Columbus, but apparently you couldn't occupy it safely, so that fell through. And then at the same time, the president at the time pushed for a constitutional amendment to ban gay marriage. And this sort of confluence of events, the space falling through with the theater, not being able to find a church, and then this move to ban gay marriage and the assumption that if you were a Christian, you had a responsibility to support this. And I just kept hearing the voice of that bishop in my head saying, there's a different way to be a Christian. And so one night at dinner, I said to Emily, I think I want to go into ministry. And she said, no. I mean, her dad was a Methodist minister. Both grandfathers were Methodist ministers. Her great-grandfather was a Methodist minister. When we got married, she thought she escaped the curse. But it wasn't a hard no, and it's been a joint ministry ever since. So that's sort of how I got into the ministry and why we decided.
Fantastic. So you were recently inaugurated here at University Christian Church to be the third president of Brite Divinity School, which really confused me when I got the invitation because I thought it was a mistake on the invite. And I asked our senior minister, Russ Peterman, who is not a graduate of Brite, I am, but he said, no, he's the third one. So I guess before that, the leader was called something else.
A dean, yeah.
A dean,
so it
okay.
wasn't until 1999 that we started having presidents at Brite Divinity School.
So is that something that you ever thought would happen? Was that a goal of yours, or how did that come about?
No, is the short answer to that question. It was neither something I expected, nor was it a goal of mine necessarily. So I've spent the last 20 years in pastoral ministry and served 3 churches from Chicago to New Jersey to Rochester, New York, which is where I've served the last 12 years. And I have loved it. And even though Emily, when we first talked about going into ministry, said, no, we have both loved being a part of ministry and being in people's lives and walking alongside people. And
you're such a good preacher. You're just such a fantastic preacher.
Thank you. I love to preach, and I enjoy it, and it's something that gives me life, and I'm honored to do it. And, it is not lost on me that it's such a gift to have people who are willing to listen to something you have to say, and you trust that the Spirit is at work and all of those things. So I've loved pastoral ministry, and a year ago, August, so about we're in November, it was, 15 months ago, I was sitting in my office in Rochester, New York, perfectly content with my life, and I got this email that said, hey, you've been nominated for the presidency of Brite Divinity School in Fort Worth, Texas. Texas wasn't super high on my list of places to move or to think about. Not that there's anything wrong with Texas, but sometimes the reputation, especially up north, is not as strong. I will say, I've met nothing but fantastic people since I've been down here. Really kind, salt of the earth, and I think the North has a lot to learn from the South and from Texas, Fort Worth, Texas, at the very least. But I was sitting in there, and I had known of Brite for years, of course, by reputation, but not by any sort of specifics. I knew it was this kind of progressive school in the South, kind of a voice crying out in the wilderness. And so I was intrigued, and I received the information. And as I was reading through the presidential profile that they sent me, very few times in my life have I felt the Spirit more clearly at work than in that moment.
Wow.
And I'm not a person who puts a lot of credence in God told me this or told me that. That's just not the way it worked for me. Maybe it works for other people that way. But in this moment, I felt something, and I felt the Spirit, and I felt like maybe the gifts that I had and the experience that I'd had in pastoral ministry would be aligned with what is longed for in this position. And so the strange part is I received that, and the deadline for the application to send your information in was like 2 days later. And so, kind of out of nowhere, I'm sitting down and finding myself writing this cover letter and submitting my CV and not thinking it was going to go anywhere. And then it just kept moving through this process until finally we were offered this position. And hard, I mean, not hard because hard because it was right, and because we have 3 kids, and one is a senior this year, and a sophomore, and a 7th grader, and what we were asking them to give up and everything they've known and loved to answer this call and trust that God is at work. And we have felt God's presence in this. Not that it's easy, because it's not, and it's hard to leave everybody you know. But
Especially your senior year.
Yeah, I know. And we've been so proud of our children and so proud of what they've been able to do and how they've been able to do it. And my prayer is that this is a skill and a experience that will last them throughout their life, so they never forget what it means to be a stranger. So they never forget what it means to be new and to pay attention to those people in their lives.
Well, I remember you preached here not long after you had moved here, and sort of the buzz after worship was, we are feeling so hopeful for Brite Divinity School. And I think that's what you have, something you've really brought to with you, is this this hopefulness for the institution and for higher education. And so I think a lot of excitement about your role and your being here and your family. So
thank you. I feel very honored to be here, and it's a great place, and even better than I knew. And there are challenges. Every institution right now has challenges, and churches and those connected to churches right now. It's a strange time and a strange moment in which to be in ministry and in life. But, I told you, I went in to pastoral ministry in no small part because at one point I looked around. Because all these good things in my life had come from the church, but at one point I looked around and realized that almost none of my peers could say the same thing. I said yes to Brite because I reached a moment in which I kind of recognized that I need that maybe the experiences that we've had, maybe the love of the church, maybe that heart for ministry could be shared, and that it can be shared more broadly, and that maybe I can have an even greater effect on the next generation of church leaders if I said yes to this. And I've felt very honored to be here.
I want to ask you a question. Here at UCC for the past 6-8 weeks, we have been doing a campaign called Love Your Neighbor, which I'm sure you've heard that before somewhere. Somebody said it.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And we thought that this was going to be just something to sort of see us through the election season, which just ended. And now we have realized that it has had such an impact on not only our congregation, I think, but on the neighborhood surrounding us, that we're going to keep focusing on loving our neighbors. And I'm curious what you think, as a follower of Christ, as a leader in the church. What does that look like? How, especially in times as divisive as these are, what are some ways that we can love our neighbor following this instruction of Jesus, in a faithful way?
You know, one of the things that, as all the hand-wringing and soul-searching that has happened since the election, and one of the things that has kept coming to mind for me is, I think we have to know our neighbor to love our neighbor. And I'm not sure that we really know each other. And I think we've allowed ourselves to get really stuck just talking with the people who already kind of agree with us. And while there can be some commiseration and some letting down, and that comes as a result of that, I think it also creates a wider chasm between people on differing sides of any number of issues, but especially our political climate in which we find ourselves. So I just keep thinking, what do I have to learn from those who voted differently than I? What is it that I have to learn and that I can learn? And how do if I want to love my neighbor, I've got to know my neighbor. And I keep thinking Howard Thurman, who is kind of the theologian of my heart, he said, it's really easy for us to talk about love of all people, but there's no such thing as all people. There's just individual persons, each with their own story, each with their own longing and need, and what would it mean to get to love them? And so, like, we don't love in the abstract, we love in the concrete. So how do we love in the concrete? And I think it starts with extending a hand, listening, sitting down, leading with some grace, giving people the benefit of the doubt, which I also recognize is easier for me to say as a straight, cisgender, white man than it is for somebody who's more directly been in systems of oppression and has been minoritized or marginalized by society. So I recognize it's hard, and I think each of us has to take that step however we can.
It reminds me a little of what you were saying about what Texas was in your mind before you got here. And then you got here and met the people. Yeah. And it was not what you had expected from the caricature idea of Texas.
And I think it revealed all this prejudice from the North, right? I mean, the story I keep telling is my youngest, who was 11 at the time, she came home from church, our church, in Rochester, New York, with people that we love and know and are all well-meaning. But she came home and she said, "Daddy, what's a dumpster fire and why are we moving there?" And I thought, thank you so much, whomever that was. But it's a reminder, like, we speak so poorly of each other and we demonize one another, and we paint with such broad brushstrokes that I think we miss the particularities. And not for nothing, Christ calls us to love even those we consider an enemy. And I don't consider people from Texas an enemy, and nor should people from Texas consider people from New York an enemy. We're just people, and we all have the same longing. We're all looking for the same thing. None of us can survive on bread alone. We're going to need human interaction and human connection, and we need each other if we're going to find our way forward. And we all have something to learn from one another. I hope that we can embrace that in some capacity and find our way in this strange moment.
So I don't know if you remember this or not, but when you preached here, you and I were sitting directly across from each other on the chancel, and Russ was at the pulpit giving your accolades and all of your titles and positions, and I looked at you and you went, and I I could not stop laughing. So, can you do it? That's exactly right.
I don't remember that.